Hello and welcome to Unit 25 of this course in Global English. We are in writing module Unit 4 and today we are going to look at some everyday words, some simple one syllable small words that we use every day, and how we will also see how these words can make a good piece of writing. Okay. A lot of courses in English talk about how to write letters, how to write paragraphs, how to write essays, and a variety of other things, genres, Here we are not talking about any of them because, we believe that you have already done enough of them. Though in later units, we may have some examples of writing letters or even essays or reports or notes, but that is not going to be the focus. The focus is going to be on how one can use English language effectively, easily and enjoyably. In other words, when you write, it should be easy for your reader to understand. When you write, it's not a pain to you. And finally, to both you and the reader, it's a joy to read your piece. It's not a strain, it's not a burden to read. So we are going to look at that kind of thing. It's like saying that we are going to look at how we can write with a pen or a laptop, whether we write letters, essays, paragraphs, short stories or poems, no matter what, Whatever you write, you use words which must be, coherently united, which must be together and must mean something the way you want them to mean. So here we are talking about how to use English words to write in English effectively, easily and enjoyably, so that it's not a pain or a bore to you or to your reader. I have called this unit short and simple. How everyday words, they are short, usually 3-letter, 4-letter, 5-letter words, mostly one syllable, sometimes 2 or even 3. I will shortly tell you what I mean by a word called syllable. Okay. Here is the word. It is pronounced with stress on the initial syllable. It is not syllable, it is syllable. Okay. So we will talk about some of these things, but eventually we are trying to say that a good piece of writing is a product of good use of words, good use of simple words, simple, familiar, everyday words used well. That's what makes a good piece of writing. And in this unit, we are going to look at some ways in which we can use these words. Now look at these words, which I call common words or words of daily use, are also known in the language of dictionary makers, in the language of lexicographers who make dictionaries, and also teachers of English and others who have who use English language as a profession, they call it most frequently used words in English. It is not a new thing. Of course, computers have made such compilations easier. You can easily put in 1,000,000 words into a computer and then see which among these 1,000,000 words has been used most often. You can take a count and you will find that words like thee, he, what you have here before you. I am sorry, a word like thee is not here. But all of these words are used most frequently in the English language. They make the first 100 words of English, according to some, not necessarily universally, not necessarily for all, but by and large, yes, these are, and there are other lists, other words. You can, I am going to talk about some of the other lists as well. There are other lists by other dictionary makers, other corpus designers. These days people think that with data taken from corpus you can help computers, or you can help a human being aided by computers to write as well as anybody else. That is how our phones, when we write messages on our phones are able to predict, looking at only 1 or 2 letters, our phones are able to say whether we are going to say he or with or on or do or say or tell or whatever. Okay. Because of the context and because of this corpus thing, they know that after this word, the next word most likely to come is this. Sometimes they also make mistakes because their guess, their prediction is not always correct, but by and large, quite often they make correct prediction because of this knowledge they gain from corpora. The plural of corpus is corpora. Corpus means body, a collection of words. So, if you look at some of the most frequently used words, you will find these among the first 100, and if you take 1,000,000 words, it is quite possible that these words have been used at least 10,000 times or 8,000 times or 5,000 times. Okay. These may be among the first few words that you learn when you learn English as a second language or even as a mother tongue, right? These are most frequently used words, and if you can use these words correctly, then it is quite likely, by these I mean not only these 20 words or 22 words here, whatever they are, okay? I mean words that appear on the list of most frequently used English words. If you master them, those 1,000 or 1,500 or 3,000 or even 5,000 words. It is true, quite true. If you master those 5,000 words, you can use English as easily as anybody else, because few of us, very few of us make any mistakes with specialist words, with words which are meant for a particular topic in a particular field, in a particular context. Okay. If you want to use scissors rather than against knife, then it is hardly likely that you say with a pair of scissors I ate my breakfast. I think if you are deliberate, if you believe in comic and you want to create funny one act plays, then you can jolly well say that. Otherwise, it is hardly likely that any one of us makes any mistake in the use of rare words, uncommon words, It is possible that at times we might use them with one meaning when they actually have another meaning. It is quite possible at times we use simply for the love of it, we may use big words like we might say, well, in winter they were hibernating. Here it is perhaps correct, but if somebody doesn't know, and if you say, well, in America they were hibernating, then hibernating does not go with place, it goes with season, it goes with climate, the time of the climate. Okay? So you make a mistake. It is possible at times by some people. English has a very funny name for this kind of thing. You can look up the net and find it. But by and large, most users of any language use rare words, uncommon words quite correctly, quite often. Mistakes, if any, errors, if any, occur generally or mostly, I won't say only, but generally or mostly in the use of common words. And therefore, it is important that we should understand how these common words are used and how they make a wonderful pieces of writing. There are many lists. How have these lists been made? Well, these lists have been made by computer specialists, by corpus designers, corpus manufacturers, corpus makers looking at newspapers for a month, let us say, or for a year. For example, there are some corpora which have 10 billion words. I mean, that is the kind of storage they have. They collected 10 billion words. There are, on the other hand, some corpora which have only 500 million words. So the difference is huge. But no matter what size they have for their corpora or their corpuses, all of these words have been taken by and large generally from some newspapers in the language, from different places, some journals, some books published within the recent decades, some films, documentaries, news broadcasts, advertisements, then calls and conversations, and in addition recorded conversations from volunteers. These companies that construct these databases, these corpuses, hire people of different age groups to be representative of their sample. They give them Walkmans, so that while they talk they can record, and these volunteers agree to keep these recording devices on their head for between a week and a month, at the end of which they surrender all the data to the corpus designers, and they look at them, and then they take these words also into the corpus. So, this is how the corpus is made, by looking at almost all the words that are written and spoken, that are heard and read in that community within a given period of time, and then they see which word has been used most often, what is number one use, which is that word which has been used at least 10 times in every 100. Okay? So, they also note frequency counts against these words. There are dictionaries which sell only doing these things. Okay? You can look up some of these things. So, no matter how many million words you take, how many million words you look at, generally speaking, English language has about 150 to 180,000 words in its ordinary average dictionaries. And it is out of these 150 to 180,000 words that we take 3 to 5,000, Look at the second bullet point on my third bullet point on my screen. 3 to 5,000 most frequent words that we use in our daily lives and with which we manage our lives. We manage our joys, our sorrows, our anguish, our frustrations, our hopes, our dreams, everything, with these words. Does it mean other words are not important? No. Every word is important because each word fits into a context. But when you look at the corpus, when you look at the data, you find that out of 10 times maybe an uncommon word has been used only once or twice. And in that rare chance when that uncommon word has been used, you have generally done a good job. You get its spelling, usually we go out of the way to learn the spelling of long and difficult and rare words. Okay? But we do not do that kind of thing with common words, with everyday words. So, it is not that other words are not important. They are important. Otherwise, your writing will remain incomplete and will become boring. Okay? But it is hardly likely that any one of us makes mistakes in using those words. Mistakes, if any, occur in our language only with these frequent words, and therefore it is important for us that we must master these common words. What is the makeup of these common words? Let us see. Suppose this is the common word, Now you find that's lots of pronouns. He, this, they, you, she, her, it, we, all of these pronouns very often. Okay? Comparatively, I is rare. It's not as rare as you might like to think, but is definitely not as common as he and you. Okay? So, but you can see that there are lots of pronouns, In about 25-30 words that we have here, you can find almost 10 or 8 to 10 pronouns. He, this, they, that, it, her, she, we, you, etc., etc. Okay. Then no nouns, of course, because pronouns stand for them. Then verbs. Next in frequency are verbs. Even in this random small list of words, imagine if you look at 100 words, it will give you a better picture. Actually, I encourage you, because most people taking this course, I hope, have already graduated and are working and are planning to work in bigger companies in other places, many other places than their own, and then therefore they might need a course in global English. So, it may not be a bad idea for you to take 100 words from any book, any spoken text, any newspaper, and see how many of these words belong to which part of a speech, and you will find that nouns and verbs dominate in that order. More nouns, maybe 55% nouns or 60% nouns, and then at least about 30% verbs, 25% verbs. Then nouns, pronouns together, I mean. Then you may have prepositions, without which two nouns would not be related, without which noun and verb may not always be related. Okay? So prepositions. Here also you can see how many prepositions we have. We have on, we have for, we have what else we have? With, on, at, for, on, etc. Out of about 30 words here, 5 to 6 are prepositions. Then there are verbs. Verbs like we have do, we have make, take, go, find, can, say, look, give. So, almost as many verbs as nouns, pronouns. Okay? And then you have some prepositions. After, maybe these words account for about 90% of all words that you use. The remaining 10% is for adverbs, adjectives, etc., etc. Okay? Though these generalizations are true only in specific contexts. They are not universal truths. Please excuse me. Okay. What I am trying to say is the following, that if you master these words, your basic, frequently used nouns, verbs, adjectives, adverbs, those 3 to 5,000 words, then it is hardly likely that you will ever make any mistakes. Another feature, how would you know these are common words? Most of the time, okay, most of the time, these are short and simple words. You have heard them before. They are not new for you. Moreover, they have only a few letters. You see, go, do, how many letters do they have? Sleep, how many letters does it have? You see, for example, look at look, 4 letters only. If you use big words, visualize, imagine, okay, watch, stare, glance, witness, they have many more letters. So, these words are usually monosyllabic. They have only one vowel, 2 or 3 consonants this side, that side. Look at these words. How many vowels do you find in any of them? Give has 2, but you don't pronounce the second vowel. Have and take and make also have 2 vowel letters, not vowel sounds. Remember, in English, you don't always pronounce all that you write, and you pronounce also more than you write. Okay? We have seen examples of some of those things. So, in spoken, I am talking of, syllable as a spoken language. Mostly in pronunciation, these words will have only one vowel, and that is why they are simple. Because they have only one vowel, so they make only one unit called syllable. And therefore, in the jargon, in the vocabulary of the students of language, it is called syllable. And because it has only one vowel, only one syllable, so it is called monosyllable. But you have two vowels, such as in monkey, M-O-N and K-E-Y, where E is also taken into account. Okay? In that case, it is a bisyllabic word. It has 2 syllables. There can be trisyllabic word, elephant, 3 vowels, elephant. Remember, you pronounce one vowel in one breath. No matter who you are the mighty of the mightiest, or you are mightiest of the mighty, or you are the more learned than the most. No matter who you are, in one breath pulse, one contraction of lung, one contraction and expansion of lung, which is what the air, which is where we get air from to speak. Okay, you produce only one vowel. Okay, so you can also say Simple words are those which are produced with only one breath pulse, only monosyllabic, like cat, only one vowel, monkey, two vowels, because two breath pulses, elephant, three vowels, three breath pulses, university, five, university, five, five vowels, five syllables. So it is by and large, synchronized. I mean, one vowel will give you only one word, generally speaking. So most of these words are monosyllabic words. You can also look at the part of their, the part of speech to which they belong. Then you notice that they are pronouns, prepositions, verbs. So nouns, pronouns, preposition, verbs dominate. Less often occur adjectives and adverbs, and still less often occur interjections. Okay. This is the makeup of the corpus. This is how we use any language in our lives every day. And if you master these words accordingly, you are not going to have any problem. The point is, how do you master them? Okay. Is there any medicine, any tablet, any yoga, any asana, any posture we adopt and we get the language inside us? I wish that were true. In that case, all of us will save a lot of labor. But unfortunately, that is not the case. Okay. We have to learn. No matter what we learn, we have to learn deliberately, by working at it, by focusing on it, by the sweat of our brow, as they say in English. Okay. So the best way to learn to write with simple and short words is to first read good literature. Read good literature. You will not only enjoy reading it if you spend some time, if you don't read like a common reader, reading only for pleasure. If you also read to look at its language, you will find that nearly all of these words, or almost all of these words, were monosyllabic. They use one or two words, one or two vowels. Mostly, there may occasionally have been three, but that seems rather rare. Look at some examples I am going to give you. Look at this example. 1. Can you make out the first bullet point? Who wrote it? Let's read it together. While in Bombay, I began, on the one hand, my study of Indian law, and on the other, my experiments in dialectics, in which Virchand Gandhi, a friend, joined me. My brother, for his part, was trying his best to get me briefs. Can you make out who wrote this without going to the net? Think of it carefully. Look at the clues. This extract has been taken from the autobiography of Mahatma Gandhi. Is called The Story of My Experiments with Truth, or My Autobiography. Okay. Actually, it's a very bold experiment. Many people write their autobiographies, but do they always write everything honestly as they may have seen and felt it? I am not sure, but here is an autobiography, Mahatma Gandhi, with the story of his experiments with truth. This autobiography, which is a landmark piece of work, not just in India, but for anyone, anywhere who loves good literature. Okay? Now, why is it good literature? Okay? Because Gandhi belonged not just to one country, one village or town or city. He belonged to the world. And the way he wrote for the world, the global. No one, among his readers were highly educated British and American friends and authors and journalists, but there also were ordinary, hardly any English knowing colleagues, his compatriots, people from the same state, same province or the country. Okay? And Gandhi wanted everyone to know what he was trying to say, because his was a battle against ignorance with the tool of knowledge. Okay? So he was speaking like a knowledgeable person, okay, a sage. Even if provoked, he doesn't provoke, he is not unhappy. Okay? So he wrote with words that were everyday words. Look at it. While in Bombay, I began on the one hand. Is there any word that is likely to be difficult? My study of Indian law, and on the other, my experiments in dialectics. So, this is a new word, dialectics. What does it mean? You can look up a dictionary. It is something to do with diet. It is something to do with, your food that you eat. Okay? You can check the meaning further in a good dictionary. Okay? So, one of his friends also joined him in his experiments in dialectics. Okay? While in Bombay, he began his practice, and therefore his brother, to help his younger brother who had newly started in legal practice, his brother tried to bring him some clients. This is a long story. You can go into it. Very inspiring indeed, but I am not going further into it because I wish to draw your. I am sorry. I am not going further into this story because I wish to draw your attention to the language of the story. Look at the words. While in Bombay, I began on the one hand my study of Indian law, and on the other my experiments in dialectics, in which Veer Chand Gandhi, a friend, joined me. Okay? Any word here which is new for you? Maybe dialectics is, maybe experiments is, but I don't imagine that there are many other words that you do not know. Okay? Similarly, my brother, for his part, was trying his best to get me briefs. Okay, we spoke about that. Look at the next. About this time, I took up the case, again from Gandhi. About this time, I took up the case of one Mani Bhai. Look at the another unit from Gandhi. Gandhi, in many ways, was like many other students of the English language of the time. There was no English spoken or read at home, at least when he was a school student. Okay? It was all limited to school textbook. But he was a hard-working student, and he passed matriculation in India and also in London with very good marks. Okay? And yet, if he so chose, he could have used most difficult words in his book. His autobiography called The Story of My Experiments with Truth. It is one of the most popular autobiographies ever, for any country in any language. Okay? It sells and it is read. It sells so many copies and it is read by so many people, because Gandhi not only had a great story to tell, he also used the language in a manner which is intelligible to all, whether very learned or almost a lay person. Look at this paragraph. About this time, I took up the case of one Mani Bhai. It was a small cause. Now, this small cause is a technical word within courts. Only lawyers will understand it. Otherwise, it's okay. You will have to pay some commission to the tout. This commission may be slightly new for those who are not familiar with the work of lawyers in law courts in India especially. Otherwise, there is hardly any word. Emphatically declined. Yes. Okay. Decline is again, or declined is again a bisyllabic word. Emphatic has 3 syllables in that, or emphatically has 5, but in that sense this is only one word of its kind. Okay. Otherwise, you have only 2 or 1 syllable words. About this time, I took up the case of one. It was, in out of over 20, 25, 26 words, you have just about half a dozen that are bisyllabic or longer. Otherwise, they are all monosyllabic, only 1 syllable words. Okay. And second, they are words you have already heard of. You are almost familiar with the meanings of all of them, except maybe words like small cause or emphatically or commission, maybe 3 or 4 out of 30. Okay. You can look up their meaning in a dictionary. Okay. So, it uses common everyday language to tell a great story. Okay. Same thing in the second paragraph. In the last paragraph I have quoted on this slide. There was no help for it. I wrung my hands. I wrung my hands in despair. My brother also felt much worried. We both came to the conclusion that it was no use spending more time in Bombay. Okay. Maybe you can say conclusion is a rather rare word. Possibly Gandhi could also have said, we both decided. It would have meant more or less the same thing. Other than that, look at the use of words. They are all familiar, they fit into the context, they are simple, everyday words. You know their spelling, you know their meaning, you know their conventions of use, and therefore you should have no problem. This is from the field of history, autobiography, literature. Okay. Look at another example. This is also from literature, the first paragraph, from a biography, but this is a fictional biography, the biography of a dog, written by somebody called Virginia Woolf. You can look up the net and you can see the photograph of Virginia Woolf on that on the net. Now, she was in many ways a very different kind of author. She wrote about women, about lonely women, about how they suffer, how they are exploited by the society, not just the women of the poor, but also the women of the rich. And that is why, she almost for the first time said that all women belong to the same class. They are exploited and they are taken advantage of. Now, some of us may not agree or may agree. That is another case. But what we will all agree with is that Woolf, Virginia Woolf, you can look up the internet and look up her books. Virginia Woolf was a great writer, a writer of short stories, a writer of novels, a writer of essays and biographies. Here, this extract has been taken from the biography of a dog called Flush, F-L-U-S-H. This has been taken from the biography of a dog which is called Flush. Okay. You can look it up, it is there on the net, okay, by Virginia Woolf. It tells you the story of about the life of a dog that was born poor and how it was adopted by a rich family and what it saw, what it enjoyed, what it suffered, what it endured, both, you know. So, for example, look at this particular extract, how this dog changed its home, went from an average kind of home into a rich home. 20 pounds had been offered for Flush's father, you know. How much would a dog like Flush have cost, you know? The author says somebody bought his father and had paid 20 pounds for that. So, Flush would at least be worth, you know, 10 or 15. Miss Mitford, the present owner of the dog, could have asked for as much, and it's not a small amount. Think of the time when 1 pound could bring you 10 grams of gold. Okay. So, it was like that. In today's terms, it will be, you know, a hell of a lot of money in Indian rupees or in any other currency as well. Okay. It was a princely sum to have. With this she might have recovered, etc., her chairs, she might have recovered her greenhouse, she might have bought herself an entire wardrobe, and I have not bought a bonnet, a cloak, a gown, hardly a pair of gloves, she wrote in 1842 for 4 years, you know. The author is trying to say that this dog came from a humble family where they had money, barely enough money for meals, let alone for fashion. So, you know, people, for years people did not buy clothes or something. They used clothes used by their elders, etc., etc. So, in one go, the author gives the reader an idea of the class from which the author comes or to which the author belongs, and at the same time the story moves forward. Okay. So, what is the story? This is the story. 20 pounds had been offered for Flush's father. It goes on, and then, you know, come to the next paragraph. Now, Flush goes from one home to the other, from the home of the poor to the home of the rich. Now, he cannot speak like human beings. He can only speak like dogs. And how do dogs speak? They bark. How do they understand anything? By smelling, because more than their eyes, more than their ears. Of course, their ears and eyes are sensitive, but their sense of smell is more powerful than any other sense of any other organ of sense they have. You know, they can smell anything from any other thing. They can distinguish between smells, and they can remember the source of a smell for a long time. Okay, that is why they are used in crime detection, etc., etc. Okay. But here the author is talking about the experience of Flush going from an humble family to a rather rich family or almost rich family. Okay. How does it go? But the effect upon Flush must have been overwhelming. Mitford pretended that it was nothing to her. It was like going from one home to another. But for Flush it was different. It was overwhelming. So, maybe overwhelming is a new word for you. The author could also have said the effect upon Flush must have been unsettling. Until this moment, he had set foot in no house but the working man's cottage. Now, Flush had never before visited any other house. He had hardly been born, and then for the few months, for about 6 months that he had been by then, he had lived only in the owner's family. Okay, so all he had known was what the owner had. who was a very simple person. So what he had at the home he left, he had the boards there were bare, there were no carpet of them, the mats were frayed, there were some mats of coarse jute or carpet, but they had been frayed on the sides. The chairs were cheap, anyone will feel ashamed using those chairs. Okay. Now Flush compares with his present situation, but here there was nothing bare. Everything was covered with either carpet or towel or a piece of cloth, but there was nothing bare, nothing frayed, nothing cheap that Flush could see at a glance. The difference between the rich and the poor, so well expressed, without ever using the word the rich and the poor, only by evoking or only by looking at the two homes from the eyes of a dog. And all this is possible because the author has used only familiar words, nothing that is unfamiliar. Let's move on. Okay. Look at another example. Earlier was, one was from biography, the other was a fiction. Gandhi was, what I took first was from Gandhi's autobiography. What I took next was a piece of literature, pure fiction, but, I mean imaginary entirely, but, a great piece anyway. Okay. This is from science. One of the very popular, actually I would go to the extent of saying that the most popular science writers of recent centuries, okay, says this about the structure of the universe. Aristotle believed that the earth was a round sphere rather than a flat plate. He realized that eclipses of the moon were caused by the earth coming between the sun and the moon. The earth's shadow on the moon was always round, which would be true only if the earth was spherical. Only a spherical object can give a spherical shadow. If the earth had been a flat disk, the shadow would have been elongated and elliptical. These things, and these are everyday words, enough to describe a topic in the frontier area of physics or astrophysics. Okay, you can look it up on the net. The same author continues, the Greeks even had a third argument, that the earth must be round, for why else does one first see the sails of a ship coming over the horizon? For here would mean because. If the Greeks did not have this third argument, then what else could one have found other than this? What they found is, because the earth is round and the ocean going boats or ships move on them, so we first see the sail of the ship followed by its mast, then the body of the ship, then the hull. Okay. Obviously, because even at a distance, look at the structure of words. Are there words that you do not know? Maybe hull may be new for you, and for those who regularly travel by boat, by ship, even that is not such a new word, but it makes a great piece of writing. Actually, the author of this book claims that this book sold more copies than any other and remained the bestseller for a long time. The only two other titles in English which had sold perhaps more copies are Shakespeare and the Bible. Otherwise, it is this book. And why? One doesn't know, but one can guess that this is the reason, that it is so easy to understand and everyone wants to know what's happening in sciences, and why would one not study if one finds that it is easy to understand? So, the point I am making once again is, no matter what you write, try and write in simple, common words. Avoid jargon as long as you can, and you will find that not only you write without committing an error, you also learn a lot about the world and the language. Okay. I have given you some exercise. If you look at these units, do you think every word here is a common word? Look at the two paragraphs. Pandit G.J. was one of the wittiest persons in the court of Tunisia king, who has been impressed with his wit and sense of humor. From time to time the king rewarded him, and he had himself considerable wealth. Go on. Do you find many words of common use there? Yes, we do. Was, of, the are there. But then we have wittiest, we have Tunisia, we have king, we have impress, we have wealth, we have brought. Okay. Then amassed rather than collected, considerable rather than big. Okay. So, wherever possible, the author seems to have used big and difficult words. Look at how big, these words are. Similarly, look at the paragraph one after that. Okay. The first tries to tell the story. The second is an SOP, a student trying to seek admission to a bigger university abroad from India. And look at the way, if you can make out something, it's a miracle. Practical application of a concept engenders a deeper understanding through personal experience, making the learning long lasting, etc., etc. What are you saying? What are you talking about? There is hardly a word which may not be new for the learner of this language, or even for an average or graduate student. Carlson School's Business and Analytics program emphasizes the experiential learning method. You see, all of this. Try and you can say these things. Maybe you may have to look up a dictionary, but you can easily say these things in your mother tongue in an effective manner using much simpler language. I have given the answer towards the end. You can please take the trouble, go there and check, but do so only after you have written yours. Then you will get a longer mileage. We have rewritten it. Now see, Pandit G.J. was a witty man, not one of the wittiest men. It still means the same thing. Look at it. Pandit G.J. was one of the wittiest persons in the court of Tunisia. What are you trying to say? He was a witty person, simple. We are not talking after this at any length about the court of Tunisia. So, why should we carry that information? Okay. Right? Then you have who was impressed with his wit and sense of humor. Of course, he had a considerable sense of humor. From time to time, the king rewarded him, and he had amassed considerable wealth. We gone through it. Look at how this has been rewritten in a simpler language. The king was impressed with his wit. From time to time, the king rewarded him. Soon he became rich. His wife's parents were also wealthy. His wife had also brought, as dowry, silver and gold jewelry. Okay. Next para, we understand a concept better by testing it. Look at all the redone paragraphs. We have redone them for you. Okay. Remember, if you learn how to speak, you move a few steps. If you learn how to speak and write both, then you move faster in your company. Without either of these, you stay where you are. Okay. So, thanks